Hi, I'm Stephen Carson coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States. Main reminder is that we do have our art contest that we do every year. The judgments usually in the week after Christmas. We will have the book cover design contest. Very ambitious. We haven't had as many entries. It's a little more of an ambitious art project, I think, but there will be prizes, and I haven't talked to them yet, but hopefully we'll get some fun judges like we usually do. Um, so we really need some more entries on that. Look forward to seeing your work. Okay, well, let's bring on Black Horse. Hello, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
Very good. In fact, this is very a show that I would say is very much shaped around your particular set of skills because first we're going to briefly talk about Canada, um, and then we're going to get into a financial industry story, which, well, okay, there's one aspect of it that neither of us would claim to be the deep experts on, which is the crypto aspect, right? Um,
Yeah, that's right.
right. But other than that, the the financial industry setting is something you can really speak to. So
Yeah,
let's go ahead.
no, that's fine. We'll get into
Okay.
it later.
So right. So real quick, peek in on a story that Black Horse had brought to our attention, and I find really interesting, even as a non-Canadian, because um, it's how do I put it? I remember when the Soviet Union fell apart, and there was all this secession, and according to the official doctrine of the U.S., the leadership of the United States would be celebrating, right? All these people freed from, Soviet oppression and everything. But in fact, and I wish I could like share a direct quote, in fact, they were not super thrilled about all that secession
No, it
happening.
was. I mean, the entire American media was was dumbstruck and almost like it would be like if in 2018 Donald Trump had just died, and they'd all kind of wonder, what am I going to talk about now?
Right, yeah, yeah, exactly. Something right, something like that. But as you were just pointing out before we went on air, there seems to be an interest for, I don't know, globalists or whatever, in having nodes that they can more easily control. And one way they're more easily controllable is if they're more centralized, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So
Instead
what?
of having to control, whatever it is, the 10 national governments that succeeded the Soviet Union,
Right,
they previously had to influence one national government, right?
right. And so their nightmare scenario, and this is part of the reason I continue to wave this banner, raise this flag out. Their nightmare scenario is a return to medieval anarchism, right? That is where there's so many nodes out there, so many different little principalities and whatever's, little small political entities that there's just no hope of coordinating them and doing massive, scamdemic things and
Well,
stuff like that,
I
right?
mean, imagine the year 2020 if you were dealing with pre-unification Germany with, like, I don't know, 25 sub-states
Right,
instead
right,
of post-unification Germany.
right, right, exactly. So there seems to be an interest in, just as much as I say, would push for secession, um, the globalists would push the other way. And so stories like this become very interesting. So catch us up on what's going on with Alberta.
Yeah, so 3 weeks ago we talked about the Alberta Sovereignty Act, which is one of three or four efforts in Canada right now, um, to undermining sort of uh, the authority of the federal government in Confederation in Canada. The Alberta Sovereignty Act uh, states that by vote of the provincial, which is the equivalent of the state government, they can declare any federal policy unconstitutional. So if they say that a policy from the federal government violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, they can refuse to enforce it and actively prevent enforcement within the Alberta borders, uh, based on a vote of the provincial legislature.
Right, and this is what, but in the United States, we have a very strong tradition here called nullification. Tom Woods wrote a book about it. If you're interested, it's not a very long book. It's really worth your time. And nullification was touted by James Madison and Jefferson in the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions as a mechanism of decentralization, I guess you could say, right? That, there's various ways that we can keep power consolidating to the center. One of them is for the constituent states or territories or whatever to have the option to just ignore what the federal government does, to nullify the dictates of the federal government and say, in our territory, we're just not doing that, right? But
Yeah,
this
it's
very
quite
much goes against the centralizing tendency of the age. There's many people who would hear what I just said and just feel horror inside. What? You don't all
well,
obey what the federal government tells you to do? That's chaos. That's anarchy, right?
and it's sort of strange because you see nullification, you see both blue state and red state nullification in the U.S. right
Yes,
now.
yes.
Um,
Nullification is back, baby. It really
so,
is. Yeah.
uh, and in Canada now we see effective nullification in French Canada. Uh, for those of
Mm-hmm.
you who don't know, Quebec refuses to acknowledge the authority of the Canadian Constitution. They never signed the Constitution Act, so they believe that that the Supreme Court doesn't have final authority in Quebec. Um,
And
so that's
this isn't just academic. There are things that the federal government has said you've got to do this, and Quebec just doesn't. Right?
yeah, this
Yeah.
has happened repeatedly with
Yeah.
particularly issues of French Canadian culture over the last 15, 20 years.
Got it. Oh, and
So that's been
so
going on.
so in regards to Alberta, is there like a particular issue? Like we
Yeah, so
want
the
to
idea
be
that
able to nullify this particular thing the federal government is doing, or is it just a more general we want to
yeah,
have local sovereignty?
so there's really two issues driving it. First, is they want to nullify federal firearms law.
Okay.
Um, so for those of you who aren't aware, the Canadian federal government is attempting to ban, you know, basically anything but a single shot hunting rifle at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, and so this is very unpopular in rural Canada. A lot of Alberta is rural Canada. And so uh, they are very much interested in nullifying that. The other issue is federal environmental regulations. So Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan are attempting to nullify federal zoning law in order to build a pipeline to hit a port in the Hudson's Bay, a port called Churchill in Manitoba in Hudson's Bay, so
Mm-hmm.
that they can get their oil and natural gas to the sea without passing through territory that their political enemies control and have you know uh, many of the energy companies in Western Canada have sunk billions of dollars into permitting processes only to see it blocked at the last minute. Either Keystone, Energy West, Energy East. So there's a pipeline called Northern Gateway that was supposed to go through BC that was systematically blocked after billions of dollars had been spent. There was a pipeline that was supposed to go to the Canadian East Coast called Energy East that was blocked in the same way. There was a pipeline the American viewers will be more familiar with that was supposed to go to the Gulf Coast called
Mm-hmm.
Keystone,
Keystone. Yeah.
which again was under construction while it was when it was finally shut down by the Biden administration. So they're pretty fed up with it. So their view is that they can build a pipeline going through friendly territory.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they built this coalition of 3 provinces, and the theory is that they can just nullify federal environmental regulations in order to make that happen.
Hey, on the
Um,
firearm thing, real quick, Black Horse. I think the general sort of uneducated take would be that the United States has a lot of gun owners and Canada doesn't have so many. But I actually know something about a little bit about Canada and firearms, and my guess is quietly there's actually probably a lot of firearms in Canada.
yeah, there's a lot of guns in Canada. There's a lot more hunting in Canada than there is in the U.S. It's just
Mm-hmm.
there's there's a lot more places you can do it. There's a lot
Yeah.
more places you can get tags, all of that stuff.
Right.
Um, there's a pretty entrenched tradition in rural Canada. Um, it's very different than in the US, because in the US, people own firearms for self-defense, and self-defense has been effectively illegal in Canada since like the 70s.
Hmm.
So if someone, attempts is like raping you and you pull out a gun and shoot them, you'll be found guilty of murder
Wow.
in Canada. So um, you that it really makes firearm ownership kind of a different thing in Canada.
Hmm.
Um, People own firearms for not because they imagine they're going to use them in self-defense or because they imagine they're going to use them to as a check against a tyrannical government. They own firearms because they're fun.
Got it. Is there a lot of like hunting tourism? Like people come to Canada to
Yeah,
do hunting?
it's a
Okay.
huge deal, especially bear
Got it.
hunting and moose hunting,
Got it.
because
Yeah.
there really aren't a lot of places in the world you can get bear tags.
Right.
Um,
I bet not. Anyway, so sorry, a little rabbit hole there, but that was interesting to me. Um, okay, right. So Sovereignty Act is, I'm sorry, is it passed or it's pretty much certain to
it's in
pass?
front. It's in front of the legislature. It's expected to pass. The
Okay.
news that came out this week is that it appears the federal government is not going to directly oppose it.
Hmm.
Um, so the federal government is not going to intervene during the process of passing it. So
Right.
it's almost certain.
Which is not to say that they don't care. They just are biding their time. Is probably the better way to look at it, right?
Yeah, well, as I outlined 3 weeks ago, they're facing rebellion kind of on all fronts at the moment. And
Hmm.
so my assumption is that they will wait for a time when it is more opportune and attack one of the instances of nullification. So it seems to me much more likely that they'll wait for Alberta to nullify something, take it to the Supreme Court of Canada, and then, once that works through the system in a couple of years, they'll attempt to knock this thing down. But
Right.
hopefully, the thinking being in 2 years, the Canadian central government might be in a better position. Um, I don't know why you would think that the Canadian central government would be in a better position at any time in the future, but
Well, you
um,
never know, right?
you know, it's not certainly not good now compared to historically for them. So maybe it's better in the future. Who knows?
Sometimes, the news cycle turns, maybe not by
Yeah,
accident in your direction, right?
yeah.
Okay, so that's that. We're keeping an eye on it. Probably, though, it sounds like from what you're saying, the next update on this might be half a year to a year from now, or who knows, right? It could be sometime in the future when suddenly Alberta decides to actually nullify something and it goes through the
Well,
courts, right?
well, I think they're going to nullify something more or less right away,
Mm,
and then you're going to immediately go to the courts, and then the battle the issue will be, well, what happens when the Supreme Court of Canada declares the Alberta Sovereignty Act unconstitutional? And if they act like Quebec has acted, then they will completely ignore the Supreme Court's ruling, and then it'll be very interesting to see what happens.
right. Okay, so that's that. And now to our main event, which is that I'll tell you, news cycles turn so fast, Black Horse. This, this would have been a hotter story like 2 weeks ago, and now it's like 5 news cycles behind or whatever. But I don't care because, and I don't know that I ever looked up the scale. I don't know if you have anything straight to hand on the scale of the
About
fraud,
30
but
billion.
okay, yeah. So this is a seriously big scam. Well, later we'll talk about what happened with Bernie Madoff, and there they throw around the number like 65 billion. But I looked at that more carefully, and that's a little deceptive because um, that was a lot of that was on paper, like what people thought they had because
Yeah,
they were being lied to, right? Um,
yeah.
that doesn't mean that literally $65 billion left from some people's pockets into Bernie Madoff's pockets. It was more like 16 billion, if I remember correctly, of
Yeah.
actually people's money being out. Um, so when you say 30 billion, though, here would it, if from that perspective, I wonder if this one counts as actually bigger. That it's 30 billion that people are actually they lost, or is that again kind
Well,
of on paper?
it's 30 billion in total assets, and the question is how much people are going to get out, and that's yet to be determined.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So we can talk about this as we go through, but
Yeah, yeah.
there's two entities here in FTX and Alameda. Alameda's a broker dealer for crypto, and FTX is supposed to be a crypto exchange. Between the two of them, they had something like 30 billion in both market cap and client assets. And at present, all that 30 billion is completely illiquid.
Right.
If you had, and some of that 30 billion will probably be recovered to creditors, but based
Mm-hmm.
on what I've seen, the answer is going to be not very much.
Not very much. Yeah. Yeah, and some, by the way, was found, as they put it, in the Madoff thing, billions. You know.
Yeah, a lot
Um,
of people got some money back
right.
out of the Madoff.
Right. But of course, many more billions were just gone. Right.
But
Um,
one of the differences between the two situations that I think is most people wouldn't appreciate is that when you're an investor or a depositor and an investment fund or a bank or a broker dealer goes bankrupt, you're first in line as a creditor for whatever assets are there. If you are a quote unquote depositor at a crypto exchange, for the purposes of US bankruptcy law, you're an unsecured creditor, which makes you the last claimant in
oh,
bankruptcy proceeding. So, in point of fact, the people least likely to get money back are the depositors at FTX.
got it. So in some ways, I don't know if the little guy is a fair thing to say here, but
Yeah.
the regular person who thought that this seemed like a good place to put their money is going to get maybe more screwed even than with Madoff, because with Madoff they might have gotten some percentage back, but this time they're probably going to get nothing. Right?
No, and it's a very unfortunate, in my view, unfortunate aspect of the law because they're broker dealer counterparties, people who were lending them money, people who had business to business relationships with them will probably get significant money back out of
Mm-hmm.
their relationship, but you know regular crypto speculator who had crypto stash there, it's not looking good.
Right. Okay. So we'll talk a bit more later about the fallout of this and some pretty angry comments from people who lost money in this. But anyway, what actually happened? What, or how do we put it? First, how about let's work a little bit backwards. What triggered it, and then what was the whole setup in the first place that made it something that could just be triggered into collapse like this?
Yeah, so as I say, there's two related entities, both led by Sam Bankman-Fried.
Right.
Alameda Capital, which is like an investment firm, and FTX, which billed itself as a crypto exchange where you could deposit money and trade crypto all day long.
Okay.
And uh, Alameda, both of these firms are fairly young. They built an enormous fortune very, very rapidly
Mm-hmm.
because they were first to market in the crypto arbitrage game. Uh, so, for those of you who are unfamiliar with arbitrage trading is where you look at market inefficiencies, so assets that are priced differently in two different markets, and
Mm-hmm.
you buy in one market, sell in the other market extremely rapidly in order to take advantage of the market inefficiency. The
Right.
classic example of this is FX arbitrage. So you've got a stock that's traded in one jurisdiction, say Canada or Great Britain, and it's also traded in the United States, and it's traded in a different currency in the two different venues. You buy the stock in one venue, sell the stock in the other venue, clear the FX, and take the profit.
Right.
Same story here. The trade that they had first was buy crypto in the US, sell crypto in Japan, clear the FX, and close it down. And they were first to market because they could get settlement done much more rapidly than, they could deal with the settlement risk of the period it took to complete crypto transactions. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
this until fairly recently, but actually, when you sell crypto, it takes quite a bit of time to clear, and you don't have a central counterparty like you do in the equity markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those of us who use crypto, I think I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's some time
So
before it's really done. Yeah, it says executed, waiting for confirmations and stuff, right?
Yes. So it executes and it takes, I think at the time Alameda first floated the trade, there was a 2-day window to actually settle the transaction
Mm-hmm.
and get the cash. And of course, you could only make an arbitrage trade in that kind of environment if you had lots of capital in order to kind of live in that continue trading while you're waiting for your money there.
Mm-hmm. So they settled quicker, more
They
quickly, and that allowed people to start making these moves without having a giant amount of capital.
well they raised a giant amount of capital from investors
Okay.
so that they could be the first to the trade, and then they
Mm-hmm.
built the crypto exchange afterwards, right? So the
Okay.
crypto exchange was kind of Alameda came first to do the trade, to do the proprietary trading, and then the crypto exchange they built afterwards.
Okay.
So that's the entity as it existed. So lots of people had deposits at FTX trading crypto, doing their thing, and FTX had its own coin that it issued called FTT.
Okay.
And the we'll start with the observation, then we'll go into how it happened. So the observation from the outside was that competing firm Binance came out saying that when they dissolved their partnership with FTX, they had a stockpile of FTT that was given to them as part of that agreement, worth about $400 million. And they tweeted out that they were going to sell this $400 million worth of FTT. Predictably, this collapsed the price of the coin, and then immediately after the price of the coin collapsed, Alameda Capital was in bankruptcy proceedings. And then, for reasons that were only obvious if you understood the relationship between Alameda Capital and FTX, the exchange was also insolvent immediately and couldn't
Mm-hmm.
pay out client funds.
Now,
So
should
that
I
was the
show that?
experience from the outside.
Should I show that tweet real quick?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Okay, because I hadn't had anything up on the screen. So this is from CZ, which is, I guess, the initials for the head of Binance. So
Yeah.
Binance is
So
another crypto exchange.
That's right. They're a direct
Okay.
competitor to FTX. And apparently, at some point in the past, they had a partnership during which time they accumulated all this FTT.
Should I read this whole thread from him? It's not that long. And
Sure.
the only reason I'm tempted is, in a way, it's kind of historic, you know. It's kind of weird to think
Yeah.
of a tweet as being historic, but in this case, it's really true. Um, he says, so this is November 6th, less than a month ago. As part of Binance's exit from FTX equity last year, Binance received roughly 2.1 billion USD equivalent in cash. Um, so what do you say? BUSD and FTT. So some of it
So,
in dollars, US dollars, and some of it in that FTT coin, right?
yeah.
Okay, got it. Due to recent revelations that have come to light, we have decided to liquidate any remaining FTT on our books. Okay, so they got some cash, they got some FTT, and maybe that 400 million was the FTT portion of the 2.1 billion, right?
That's the implication, yes.
Yeah, okay, gotcha. So the FTT part of that payout, they're saying we're gonna get rid of that. So why is he doing it? We will try to do so in a way that minimizes market impact. Due to market conditions and limited liquidity, we expect this will take a few months to complete. So we're going to start selling off the FTT, right? Finance always encourages collaboration between industry players. Regarding any speculation as to whether this is a move against a competitor, it is not. Our industry is in its nascency, and every time a project publicly fails, it hurts every user and every platform. We typically hold tokens for the long term, and we have held onto this token for this long. We stay transparent with our actions. Okay, well, some of this, in retrospect, sounds like political speak, right?
Well,
Or
the
covering
real
his
question
ass.
is, due to recent revelations, and then later on it says we typically hold on to tokens for the long term, and in the
Mm-hmm.
meantime they say this isn't a move against a competitor, blah blah blah. The question is, what were those recent revelations, right? So in his first tweet it says, due to recent revelations that have come to light. Well, what
Oh,
was
okay.
that?
Right, right. And we don't know. You're saying we actually don't know what he's talking about when he says recent revelations.
No, and if we did know what he was talking about, we couldn't. If we hadn't a thought as to what he was talking about, he would have a legal interest in not being clear,
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
right?
Potentially.
Because,
Yeah.
because he the issue is here is this an active insider trading? Well, we'll see.
Right. Um, now you had suggested that part of the reason that FTX unraveled here is that current economic conditions. Can you tie that in?
Yeah, so the first thing that we're trying to explain here in the collapse of FTX is why did the price of FTT go to virtually zero? And so the import one of the first things to set out there is, well, why was there no market for CZ Binance to sell their 400 million plus in FTT into? So he says, due to liquidity limits, we expect that it'll take months to liquidate this position. Um, so there's a bunch of questions there, but
Mm-hmm.
but put aside the questions as to why they tweeted this out rather than just doing it, all of that crap.
Mm-hmm.
First things first, why was nobody interested in buying FTT? So why was there no bid side liquidity on the coin?
Right,
Well,
because you're saying 400 million of Bitcoin you could probably liquidate in less than a few months.
yeah, you might be able to liquidate it in like a few hours, right?
Right, right.
Um, and you might be able to liquidate it without much price destruction. I'm it's hard to it's hard to get transparency into how deep the liquidity is in any particular cryptocurrency,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, one thing's for sure, the liquidity pool is a hell of a lot shallower now than it was 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so the broad the broad market here is worth considering.
Yeah.
So crypto of virtually all kinds is an asset that has significantly diminished in value over the last, well, really 12 months.
Now I knew about
Um,
Bitcoin. I'd seen that the price for Bitcoin had dropped quite a bit. But you're saying this is actually across all the cryptos, which I didn't realize that.
yeah, so cryptos have a very high correlation to one another. It,
Mm,
there are always coins that don't correlate. There are always um, there are always like there are always the correlation certainly isn't 100%, and there are positive performers even in this kind of market. But broadly speaking, uh, almost all coins have been down quite significantly over the last 12 months.
okay.
So that's one piece of the backdrop. Another piece of the backdrop is that there have been a number of high-profile crypto bankruptcies in the last 6 months. Uh, famously, prior to this, uh, FTX actually bailed out another crypto firm.
Mm,
I'm trying to recall the name of it. Anyways, it doesn't matter. They recently bailed out a smaller crypto exchange. Prior to this, that crypto exchange has since filed for bankruptcy again. Um, but there have been quite a number of these sort of crypto startups that have gone under as a consequence of this quite negative market environment. So it's not surprising that there's a lack of liquidity here to sell into. And broadly speaking, in a negative market environment like this, there's going to be a lot of pressure, a lot of pressure on uh, a lot of liquidity pressure on crypto firms.
I was trying to find who they bailed out. BlockFi?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thought I found it. Okay,
So
so right, so there's less liquidity in the market, which probably related to the as we've called it on this show, the non-recession, right?
yes,
The recession that dare not say its name, um, and that means that um, certain activities become more vulnerable to being exposed, shall we say?
yes, but it also means that for the purposes of this part of the discussion, if you're dumping a pile of cryptocurrency of a particular coin on the market, you're much less likely to have traders on the other side,
Mm-hmm. Got it.
right?
Right.
So if they had dumped this 400 million, whatever it was worth in 2020 on the market, there would have been lots of new entrants to the crypto market who might have scooped it up.
Mm-hmm.
In this environment, that's just not the way things are.
Right. Okay. So my question always is when you see something like this happen, Binance I'm sorry, they simply tweet that they're going to sell FTT, and then FTT just collapses, right? And then Alameda collapses, and then FTX collapses, or something like that.
Yes.
Basically, a house of cards collapses. Why was it a house of cards in the first place?
Yes, which is the the basic kind of underlying issue.
Right.
So FTX was nominally a crypto exchange, but it was engaging in activity that you would not anticipate if you were just kind of a lay person looking at a crypto exchange. If you were a layperson looking at a crypto exchange, you would or I would expect that if I put money in my crypto account, bought a cryptocurrency, they would sit there and hold on to the cryptocurrency and execute transactions and charge me fees for executing transactions or holding crypto there.
Right.
That's what I would expect.
Mm-hmm.
And in point of fact, that's what their terms of service said that they were doing.
Okay.
However, uh, when Alameda started to lose money as the crypto market ran into headwinds in 2022, it appears that FTX loaned very, very large sums of money to Alameda Capital, who then turned around and invested that money in, well, a number of cryptocurrencies, but most importantly in FTT in order to prop up the FTX coin. So the allegation is that this loan was on
Wait.
the order.
Okay, so I'm picturing that. Well, number one, it bothered me right away when you said that a crypto exchange also had its own coin. That seems like a conflict of interest, right?
Yes, yeah, that would
Yeah,
seem like a conflict of
that
interest to me.
that right there, that seems like a red flag.
But to be fair to them, a lot of
Yeah,
crypto
okay.
exchanges have their own coins.
Okay, that's interesting. Um, I'm not saying it's good, even if a lot of people are doing it. But anyway, so you'd expect that what you would expect from a crypto exchange, even with its own coin, is that if FTT is, doing well or whatever, it's because people are coming onto the exchange
Normal
and
people are
choosing to
buying
buy
it,
it.
right?
Right, right. As opposed to they're kind of in a backdoor way buying their own coin with the money that you've got there parked, possibly to buy other coins, right?
Yes.
And that's
So you
basically
would
what they were
expect
doing.
you as a retail investor would expect two things. First of all, that FTT is valued based on the retail demand for FTT. And you would expect that your money deposited in FTX is actually, whether it's a crypto coin or whether it's US dollars or whatever it is actually sitting in FTX segregated for your use.
Yeah.
Neither of those two things were the case. FTX was taking your money deposited in the exchange and lending it to Alameda Capital, who was then using some proportion of that money to buy FTT in order to goose the price.
Okay, now we've I think we've used the term Ponzi scheme in our discussions about this prior to the show. This doesn't sound exactly like a straightforward Ponzi scheme, which
Well,
is I try to
the premise,
I try to liquidate my uh, deposits. I ask for my money back basically from the exchange. I'm done playing in the crypto market. I want my money back. And they take money that other people have deposited and hand it to me. And that would be like a Ponzi scheme, right?
that's correct. That's a classic Ponzi scheme.
Classic. And this sounds a little bit different.
this is a little bit different. The way that FTT is kind of like a classic Ponzi scheme. So
Hmm.
if you were an investor in FTT, the money that you got when you sold FTT probably came from an investor who had deposited funds in FTX.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Got it.
you know, John
I see.
Smith deposits money in FTX, FTX lends it to Alameda, Alameda buys FTT, and you, investor in FTT, get paid off with the new investors' funds. So
Right.
FTT itself is kind of like a Ponzi scheme where you're paying off old investors with capital coming in from new investors, though the new
Mm-hmm.
investors in this case don't know that they're investing in the Ponzi scheme.
Right, right. It's just a little, well, they probably all the Ponzi schemes have a little bit of this indirection, right? Where
Yeah,
it's making a little trip from new hand to old hand. Right.
that's right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the interesting intellectual debate is this a Ponzi scheme, or is this like a direct transfer of cash into the hands of the people in control of Alameda, because all the executives at Alameda were all big holders of FTT, right? So
Oh,
Sam Bankman-Fried, the 10 people in his quote unquote polycule were all, you know, in on the ground floor of the Ponzi scheme, and then funneled depositor cash over to buy it to goose the price, and then would use the sale of FTT in order to finance their lifestyle.
I just want to apologize to everyone, watchers of this, show that has a bow tie as its icon, as its logo, that the word polycule has come into this, and I can only say that it's because we live in the ashes right now. I mean, I wish I never knew that word. But anyway,
Well,
it's
I didn't know that
horrendous.
word until this controversy came up, but apparently that's what they're called.
Hey, we should have T-shirts. Sam Bankman-Fried's stole tens of millions of dollars, and I got the word polycule out of it, right? We all Sam gave us something, right? Anyway,
Yeah, there you go.
anyway, okay, so okay, so I'm sorry.
So,
Why would it not be a classic Ponzi scheme? Why is
well,
there a
because
debate there?
because in a classic Ponzi scheme, you're like charging service fees and you're not the ground floor investor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Equally, in a classic Ponzi scheme, people know that they're investing in the Ponzi asset, whereas in this case,
Mm-hmm.
they think they're depositing U.S. dollars, Bitcoin, whatever other coin, Ethereum, whatever, in this exchange. They don't think that they're investing in FTT.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, if you blur it a little bit and just say people were buying crypto and they were using that money to prop up one of the cryptos, it's a little closer to, it's kind of squint a bit. It's a little closer to a classic Ponzi scheme. But yeah, when you really disaggregate into the different cryptos, it makes it a little more complicated, right?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
it's not it doesn't elegantly fit into the box of previously owned scams, which is
Right.
probably why it works so well.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
um, just want to emphasize again the
so
scale of this because if people weren't affected by this or just haven't been paying attention, they might not understand why we wanted to cover this story. Tens of billions of dollars are just like
yeah,
evaporated, right?
the allegation is that the loan of deposits is on the order of 10 billion from
Mm-hmm.
FTX uh, over to Alameda, and that something like 6 billion of that 10 billion was passed into FTT,
Mm-hmm.
and that that FTT is now worth approximately nothing. It's completely illiquid.
Right.
So whether it will be worth nothing forever, whether like there's all those issues as well. And
Yeah.
now you have a trustee in bankruptcy trying to figure out how to liquidate both of these firms. And I, who knows how well a trustee of bankruptcy is going to trade out of crypto positions. So,
Okay.
um,
So I want to highlight real quickly that just yesterday, Sam Bankman-Fried, and this may have been scheduled before all this went down, right? But whatever. He was featured as a speaker at a New York Times event called Deal Book, I believe. Um,
Yep.
and so he spoke yesterday. Now, to be clear, what he ended up talking about was what happened with this, right? Um,
Yeah, it turned out to be a somewhat hostile interview. Uh, but nevertheless, usually when somebody runs a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme, they're given interviews from a prison cell, and he was giving it from a luxury apartment in the Bahamas.
was he in the Bahamas, really?
Yeah, so they
Oh my
headquartered
goodness.
FTX in the Bahamas because a number of the coins that they trade are illegal in the United States.
Okay.
And so sorry, Bankman-Fried and the polycule, quote unquote, are all holed up in the Bahamas, and there is some speculation that uh, they're cooperating with the Bahamian authorities in order to prevent extradition to the United States.
Mhm. Yeah, so maybe there was an extra bonus of not being located in the United States because they might be in a slightly different legal situation right this moment, right?
Yeah, yeah.
um, okay, so anyway, that's curious that he's just done this what looks like pretty much a classic scam on a huge Bernie Madoff type scale, but he has not been arrested. In fact, he's speaking at a U.S. you know at the
Not
event at
only
an
has he
event
not been
sponsored.
arrested, none of the other executives have been arrested. You
Mm.
know, there have been no charges laid, none of this stuff, right?
Okay, well
It's
we'll
not
come
it's
back
not
to
like they're
that.
negotiating for it's not like they're negotiating for extradition with the Bahamian government. There
Right,
hasn't been a charge laid.
right. We'll come back to why this is curious, but let's amp up how curious this is by looking at the analysis of FTX by a rather significant figure, right? Um, so with this going into bankruptcy, have they declared bankruptcy?
Yeah, so they're
Okay.
both firms are in bankruptcy protection.
Okay, right. So they've declared bankruptcy, and a fellow named John Ray III, no reason that you would know his name necessarily, but you know what he's done before. He oversaw the liquidation of Enron. So this is not a bit player, right? Um,
Yeah.
and he said in a U.S. court filing on Thursday, what is this article from? November 17th. So yeah, this is about a week or two ago. He said FTX was the worst case of corporate failure that he had seen in his more than 40-year career. Now remember, he oversaw the liquidation of Enron, and he's calling FTX the worst case of corporate failure. So when John Ray III says that you're the worst case, that's really saying something. Okay,
Yeah.
but let's get into some of the details. Um, okay, and then just jump into comment as I read some of these quotes. From your own perspective, Black Horse. He says, never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information has occurred here. Okay, he's using big words here, but they talk about having two sets of books and all that. He's saying, like, there are no books.
Yeah.
There's just no
That's the
books.
allegation here, basically.
Right,
There's no
right.
books. I have no idea what money is here. Like, how am I supposed to liquidate
Yeah,
this? And
what
this
is
this
this
is what
mess?
was getting. This is what I was getting at when I said no one really knows how big this fraud actually is,
Right,
because it might be that there's some money here, but nobody seems to clearly know.
right. Um, so, yeah, the chaos and mismanagement at the heart of what was once a leading crypto industry player. Oh, notice what this article says with deep ties in Washington, D.C. We'll return to that, foreshadowing. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, it
But
also says,
there's some
oh,
choice issues here.
yeah, go ahead.
Apparently expenses were approved with emojis. Like, this is the most terminally millennial kind of fraud you could imagine.
Oh, sorry, I'm distracted by one thing, Black Horse. The article, this is Ars Technica, by the way. I should share the link. It looks like a good article. Um, uh, it says that the demise of Bankman Fried's FTX empire has plunged crypto markets into a crisis. Did you do you? I haven't been watching crypto markets since the last month. Do you have any indication of that
Yeah,
chaos they're talking about?
it's certainly the case that it has been a shock to the crypto markets. So if I look at when this news broke, look at Bitcoin because it's the biggest item on the exchange. Bitcoin was trading around 21,000, and immediately afterwards declined to between 16 and 17,000.
Because of
So
FTX, you're saying?
because of the FTX event.
Oh wow.
Uh,
Okay.
so that's one of the reasons why people were uh, making such a big deal about this on Twitter is not because of the size of the fraud itself at 30 billion, but there was an argument made that because of the contagion effect on the broader crypto market, you should really think about this as a several $100 billion fraud
Mm-hmm.
because of the market capitalization wipeout. Which,
Got it.
interestingly, if you go back and listen to my earlier comments on crypto, one of the basic problems in the crypto market is there are no like permanent sinks for cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
Or I shouldn't say no, there are very few of them.
Right.
So, like a permanent sink in the fiat currency market is you can always use it to pay tax. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there are certain entities that will accept it at kind of a fixed rate for, really for genuinely useful things. At the very least, the government will accept it.
Right.
There's no comparable situation that is a permanent sink for crypto. So all there
Right.
really is for crypto on the downside is whatever committed buyers there are.
Yeah.
Um,
The,
and
the
so
the
when you
sort of
have a
crypto diehards are the closest you've got to something like that.
That's right. And you've
Yeah.
got, I think there's one Latin American country that accepts it for
Mm-hmm.
like, um, but it's a very small economy.
Right.
Anyways, the bottom line is that in a shock condition, this is a really bad problem. It makes crypto extremely volatile,
Right. It means how low can it go? It can go really, really low. Like the
and
bottom
it can
is
do it,
really far down there. Right.
and it can do that with very, very quickly, right?
Right. Right. Okay. So a few more comments from Mr. Ray. He said what he found at. Remember, there's these different entities, right? FTX International, FTX US, and Alameda Research Trading Company. He found it compromised systems integrity. I'm sorry. He found compromised systems integrity, faulty regulatory oversight, and a concentration of control in the hands of a very small group of inexperienced, unsophisticated, and potentially compromised individuals. Okay, now translate this out of his speak here. What does he mean, potentially compromised individuals? I don't quite get what he's
He
getting at
means that they're part of the polycule,
there.
right?
Okay.
So it means that they're potentially benefiting out of the scam, right?
Okay, got it. In other words,
So when
what
you're
you.
doing when you're doing risk control, what you want so like when I worked on a trading desk, you have somebody sitting on the trading desk who doesn't work for the head of trading,
Mhm.
and you have that so that the head of trading can't fire people blowing the whistle on them, right?
Got it. Right, right. You
And
want
what
some you want
what
some
he's saying,
independent voices in the room, and he's saying there were no independent voices in the room.
no, they were swapping bodily fluids as well as cash.
Gotcha. Um, okay, let's see. Scathing filing. I want more words from him, ideally. Okay. Here we go. FTX failed to keep proper books, records, or security controls for the digital assets it held for customers. Use software to, quote, conceal the misuse of customer funds, close quote. Now, when he says that, that just sounds like straight out. He's just saying
Well,
that there was
he's
illegal
talking
activity, right?
yeah, he's talking about moving customer funds from FTX into Alameda. That's what he's
Right,
talking about.
right. They gave special treatment to Alameda, said Ray, adding that the debtors do not have an accounting department and outsource this function. Um, the company did not have an accurate list of its own bank accounts or even a complete record of the people who worked for FTX. Yeah, now what's sort of the reason I'm laughing is, and this is just a mess, right? But it's a mix of stuff that sounds, like bad business practice, possibly scammy business practice, and just sort of amateur hour, like clown behavior,
Yeah.
right? Like you don't know who your employees are. What? Um, The FTX used an unsecured group email account to manage the security keys for its digital assets. Okay, let's
Which is,
keep.
this is actually one of the other important allegations. So
Yeah.
one of the other important allegations is that a large dollar amount of crypto was smuggled out of Alameda or FTX after the bankruptcy filing. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so when he's talking about lack of controls, there's all sorts of allegations out there that the reason why the corporate controls were so bad was so that when the firm blew up, specified individuals could smuggle the crypto out and
Mm-hmm.
do whatever it is that they wanted to do with it, right?
Gotcha. Okay, we'll be repeating something slightly here, but it's so amusing. It's okay. The group's funds had been used to purchase homes and other personal items for staff and advisors, and payments were approved through the use of personalized emojis in an online chat. Um, Ray said that one of the most pervasive failures at FTX's main international exchange was the lack of records about decision making. He said that Bankman-Fried often used messaging platforms with an auto-delete function and encouraged employees to do the same. Okay, well, I'm enough on the inside of this industry that I can comment on this one, Black Horse, which is for certain activities, there are what's the term for it? Record retention requirements.
Yes, and in
That
point of
yeah.
fact, very recently, it's public, so I can say this. Very recently, I think it's Bank of America was fined $1 billion by the SEC for not properly capturing all of its employees' communications, particularly text messages. So
Hmm.
people were conducting business activity over text messages or messaging apps, and in order to avoid email record retention, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so um, this is just, if this were a broker dealer, this would be uh, this would be a crime.
Right. Right. Oh, now are you saying that they would not have the record retention requirements for what they were doing?
Well, there's an art. So Alameda is not a broker dealer, right? So they're
Hmm.
not
Okay.
regulated by the SEC. I mean, they're in the Bahamas as well, so I don't know what the local regulator there is. Um, so there's a huge jurisdictional fight going on over firms like FTX and Alameda about whether and what securities regulators should have oversight authority.
Got it.
And so
Okay.
when the bankruptcy liquidator here says that there's a failure of regulatory oversight, that's what he's talking about.
Hmm.
That people like the SEC or the equivalent in the Bahamas should be imposing and auditing things like communications records uh, and various other corporate controls, and they're not.
I would say that whatever the legal requirements, a CEO, which I think Bankman-Fried was, a
Yes.
CEO who is using a messaging platform, the implication is here for company decision making with an auto delete function and encouraging employees to do the same. It doesn't seem like these people are on the up and up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That
This
looks
is
that if we're to put some things on the side of this looks like clown show and some things on the side of this looks like a scam, that one's definitely on the scam side.
right.
Not having a list of your employees, that one's on the clown show side.
Poncho side, right? Okay, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to. I think we've given a pretty good flavor of what we're seeing here with this. Um, and oh yeah, listen to this statement. Bankman-Fried previously told the Financial Times that FTX had accidentally given $8 billion of FTX customer funds to Alameda. Now, for me, like a normal person who does not function in millions and billions of dollars, um, I get lost a little bit when these kinds of numbers are thrown around. But I'm assuming, Black Horse, that even in the world of high finance, accidentally moving $8 billion
Yeah.
is a little implausible, shall we say?
Yeah. Yeah, that's I mean, what are you gonna say?
Oops. 8 billion, you know how, 8 billion, it's easy to, anyone could do it. $8 billion here, $8 billion there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so
Well,
I
to
think that's
follow our
mostly.
previous
Go ahead.
unit of measure, accidentally moving 1/5 of the price of Twitter.
Right. Oops. Um, and in fact, as you mentioned at the event, he really laid at the event yesterday. He really laid emphasis. In fact, I don't think we've gone into this yet. Maybe you could talk about this now. Um, he did get hit with some hard questions, and what was his defense, in short?
Yeah, so his defense was that the collapse of Alameda and FTX was a consequence of poor risk management, poor decision making. Um, so his defense is that this is incompetence and not fraud.
Right.
Um, and so he should not be charged with anything because so every time he was asked a question by the New York Times report event, it was Andrew Ross Sorkin who did the interview. He's a longtime host on CNBC,
Mm-hmm.
and a contributor to the New York Times, kind of a scummy leftist, but nevertheless,
Mm-hmm.
um, he would ask questions repeatedly about whether or not FTX was mingling client funds with brokerage funds, because
Mm-hmm.
that's like the cardinal sin of uh, running a financial firm. Clients'
Mm-hmm.
funds are supposed to be segregated on behalf of clients. And every time he was asked this question, he would respond back with, well, with an explanation of why Alameda lost money, right? Bad risk controls, the market went against us, bad decision making, that kind of stuff. Whereas the fundamental question is, why did Alameda have the money in the first place, right? Why were you
Right.
taking client crypto deposits and lending it to a broker dealer in order to make trades of any
Right.
kind?
Yeah. That's the fundamentally Ponzi aspect of this. And every time they tried to pin him down on that, he basically avoided that central uh, concern of fraudulent business practice, right?
That's right. And when they
Yeah.
read out the segment of the terms of service that's supposed to present this, his argument was, well, in other parts of the terms of service, it says other things.
Oh, oh, hey, this is a good time to drop in this wonderful super chat from Dreadnought. Thank you. He says, it doesn't just sound like a list of bad business practices. It sounds like they were attempting to achieve all bad business practices. Well said. Well said. Yeah. We need a checklist and see how many bad business practices we can check off in this story. Okay, so hopefully we've laid a picture of why there's a mystery here, which is that as yet, we're not predicting the future here, as yet, Sam Bankman-Fried and various other associates don't seem to be, they're not arrested. There's not a warrant out for their arrest, I believe you said, right?
No,
Right.
they're not charged with a crime. None of this
Right.
stuff, right?
Right. Which seems remarkable given everything we've just learned, um, especially because we can draw a parallel to another situation which happened um, at a very interesting time about 15 years ago, and that is 14, yeah, about 14 years ago, which is Bernie Madoff, which at the time was considered the biggest um, fraud that had ever happened, ever. I think. I mean, I don't know. How do you compare to the Mississippi bubble or something like that? But anyway,
Certainly the biggest in nominal terms.
yeah, yeah. Um, they usually throw the number around of $65 billion, right, for that.
Yeah.
With that, and there it seems like it much more easily and obviously fits into a Ponzi scheme structure. That is, um, the
Yeah, it looks like in retrospect, Madoff was not even making any investments at all. He
right.
just deposited clients' money and paid off clients with and paid off redemptions with
Right. So
client
just to
cash.
make clear what was going on, he got funds from clients and told them, "I'm investing this, and I'm giving you double-digit percent returns, like 12% returns or something, which is really good for those who don't know." That's really good if you can consistently deliver something like that. It's almost unbelievable, really, right? Year after year. And this had been going on since the 60s. Um,
1990 was when the firm that ultimately fell apart was founded.
oh, okay.
Whether the previous firm that he was involved in was a Ponzi scheme as well or not
We're
is a
not so
matter of
sure.
debate.
We're not so sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, but the idea is you give him your money and he's reporting these great returns. Of course, every so often somebody asks and needs to cash out for some reason, right? And he sends you all this money. So everything's good, right? Well, along comes an episode that we've covered in great detail on this show, and that is the 2007 2008 bust. Um, and suddenly a lot of people want to cash out. And he's got people wanting, I forget what it was, $8 billion from him or something like that. And he doesn't have it. And he goes to his family members and says, I'm not going to be able to pay these people back because it's all been a fraud. Some of them seem to be in on it. Some of them, it's not clear that they were in on it. His sons turn him in. I mean, he's about to turn himself in, basically, but he was going to take a week to sort of wind it all up. But his sons go to lawyers, and the lawyers say, "No, we got to blow the whistle on this right now if you have any hope." His sons turn him in. One of them later ends up committing suicide. I mean, it's just a terrible story as you dig into it. Lots of people lost a lot of money. Some of them got some of it back, but this is one of those things, right, Black Horse, where they would have gotten some percentage, right? They wouldn't have like gotten all
That's
their money
right.
back. They would have gotten 20% or something, some percentage of it back.
Yeah.
But big losses for investors, and a lot, maybe some big wheels and stuff. But I gather, certainly from starting early, there were just people who were just like friends and trusted him and thought he was doing a good job growing their retirement funds or whatever. So it was really
Yeah,
awful.
a lot of people who were like 20 plus year clients, that kind of thing.
Right, right. They trusted him to be doing a good job at what he was supposed to be doing. Um, but
Well,
there's
and
some
he was showing up on CNBC, and he had great fund reporting, and he was respected all over Wall Street.
right. In
And
fact, that's one of the things about this story that's interesting, which is that, and tell me if you have a different perspective, but Madoff seems to have had real achievements. Namely, he developed a technology very early in his career that uh, became the basis for the Nasdaq, right?
yeah, that's right. And there's like two elements to this that are really interesting. The first is that he had like genuine achievements in the financial industry, and the
Right.
second, which Lady of Shalott is alluding to in her super chat,
Hmm.
is that there were a number of uh, really obvious warning signs at various junctures, and people who tried to blow the whistle on him, and the SEC, you know, as you say, his sons turned him in. The SEC didn't catch him.
Right. Yeah, let's read Lady of Shallott's super chat. Thank you, ma'am. Madoff's fraud was first detected in 1999 by analyst Harry Markopoulos. It took him 4 minutes to prove that the numbers did not add up. The SEC ignored it until 2008 when the proof was overwhelming. Um, yeah, in fact, thought I had that quote. It was amazing. Yeah, according to Markopoulos, it took him 4 minutes to conclude that Madoff's numbers did not add up and another minute to suspect they were fraudulent. Like
Yeah.
he was doing like a back of the envelope calculation. Oh, what was the other one I shared with you that blew my
Yeah,
mind?
so he was a, a whistleblower in I think 2004 came to the SEC and pointed out that one of the trades that Madoff had publicly tied himself to involved more options contracts than were outstanding on the CBOE, so it was
Mm-hmm.
definitely impossible. Um, so there were a number of attempts to blow the whistle on him,
Here was
and
another one. Here's another one. On occasion, his people slipped up and dated trades as taking place on weekends and federal holidays. Famously, by the way, when we talk about a bank holiday or a weekend,
Yeah.
The major stock exchanges are shut down. Um, and so that, a trade dated on a date like that, to anyone who knows financial markets, you immediately go, what? That makes no sense. Um, but they were never caught. So, in fact, it mentions the Wikipedia article mentions that there was 6 SEC investigations, I think,
Yeah.
and prior to his sons turning him in, and they never caught on to him somehow. It's really weird, and of course there were allegations that somebody at the SEC was somehow covering for him, though I don't know that no one ever went to jail for that, so can't really swear
No,
what
no one
happened
was
there.
ever even charged. Nobody,
Yeah,
like, um, there were no obvious consequences to anyone on the outside for what happened there. No one
yeah.
at the SEC lost their job.
6 investigations into Madoff by the SEC that went nowhere. Oh, here's what
Yes,
it said: all
which really goes
botched.
to the
Go ahead.
the old Mises argument that the SEC is kind of useless. Like, if you can
Yeah.
investigate a clear Ponzi scheme 6 times and find nothing, like, they weren't even making trades.
But they sure keep the industry busy with paperwork, don't they, Black Horse?
Well,
Um,
the SEC needs to continue to exist. It's very important. Bankers' lives matter.
right. It just doesn't help anybody else. Um, yeah. So there were investigations by the SEC. There were neglected allegations by financial experts. There were whistleblowers, and it just kept going on. Um, the final year was 2008, and you said it started in 1991. They never, as Lady of Shalott points out, they never made any investments. He would take the money, he would put it in his personal bank account at I think Chase or something. He'd put it in
Yeah.
his personal bank account, and then when somebody asked for a redemption, he'd take some money out and pay them.
Yep.
And then just a bunch of his staff, his secretary in particular, ended up going to jail. This old lady. Um, his staff would just fake stuff up, and that's why they'd make dumb mistakes like showing trades happening on days when the exchanges were closed because they didn't know what they were doing, probably, right?
Yeah. Well, they were, if you're making up trades for 20 years, like, you're gonna make a mistake.
So one of the things that's interesting when you think about these two events, when we think about these two events, is that in the case of the Madoff scandal, what triggered it collapsing was a bust. That is, because there was a general financial bust going on, which we've covered. Um, at the end of 2008, he had too many redemptions and he could not pay out because he didn't really have the money, right? He was faking it all. Um, the reason Ponzi schemes last is because it's a con game, literally, right? A confidence game. If most of your investors have confidence in you, then they don't ask for a payout. They're like, hey, my money, I'm just going to have more and more money forever, right? Um, and as long as you keep everybody's confidence, you can keep these things going for quite a while. I mean, this lasted from 1991 to 2008. So what is that? 17
Yeah.
years, right? Um,
And FTX lasted for, I think, 4 or 5 years. Like,
oh, okay. Yeah.
you know,
So it was a while. Yeah. And a
so
huge amount of money
as
in both
a huge
cases.
amount of money. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, in both cases, it seems like the I hope I'm not overstating the case here, but the boom facilitated scams, right? And the bust,
Wrung them out of the
of
system.
yeah, eventually exposed the scams, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is a great
Although
lesson
it's worth
learned for
saying,
us.
in the FTX situation, it's unclear whether Binance intentionally exposed the scam or not. Right? We
Yeah,
showed
like
that
they
tweet
knew
at the
they knew it was
beginning.
going on. Yeah,
We showed that tweet in the beginning. You tweet out in advance of selling a giant lot of FTT, and then the next day, the FTX and Alameda are in bankruptcy court. Um, I I have no inside information. I don't know, but if I was a crypto regulator, I would be very interested in what they did and didn't know.
right. And CZ at Binance might be sweating it that he doesn't get asked too many questions. Right?
Well, I mean, CZ at Binance is sitting inside is in like one of the few places on earth where the SEC cannot ask him questions in mainland China. So
Oh, okay.
uh, the SEC will not be asking him questions, whether
Okay.
they would like to or not.
Right. So, continuing on with this boom versus bust perspective, let's talk about the crypto boom. And here we have a story. This is just from 2 days ago, or a couple days ago. Miami nightclub owners mourn loss of crypto nerds after FTX collapse. So one of the things you see in the boom, and this goes way back. I mean, the tulip uh, boom and bust in the Holland, right? Hundreds of years ago. I mean, uh, um, in the 90s, the boom in the 90s, the dot-com boom. One of the things you see is, how do we put it? Just crazy over the top behavior
Yeah.
because people are living in some kind of like unreality bubble, right?
Well, there was a
Um,
famous story prior to by one of the short traders in the '08 crisis, where he first got the idea to short mortgage-backed securities when he went to a strip club in Florida, and all the strippers were talking about trading houses.
wow. um, okay, so so in Miami, there were venues such as E11. I think I'm saying that right, and it's with neon lights, trapeze dancers, and burlesque shows. It says that these crypto guys were coming there. There are a couple things that stuck out to the people running this. One is just the sheer amount of money they were throwing around. They were ordering 12 or 24 bottles of the most expensive champagne and just showering themselves without even drinking.
Yeah.
um, the crypto entrepreneurs wanted to show that they didn't have any limits. Um, and he says, so one of the things was that they were spending all this money. The other is that they were young and kind of nerdy. So that stuck out to him, right?
Yep.
Predominantly young men, awash in money, coming to Miami to flaunt their wealth. Um, they were booking tables for $50,000. He said the crowd was about 95% men, young, with a kind of nerdy style. You couldn't tell they had a lot of money if they were just walking around. I guess that's his way of saying that they were. Maybe I'm misreading it, Black Horse, but it sounds sort of like nouveau riche.
Yeah, they
They
stuck
they
out like
don't.
a sore thumb, right?
Yeah, they don't look like people who are used to having money, right?
Well,
Um,
and if you go to an establishment like this, there's a certain kind of profile that has been going to establishments like this for a very long time, right? And the crypto guys were a new profile.
yeah, yeah, right, got it. They did not fit. Something, yeah, they stuck out. Um, 50 Cent was performing one time. Their spend was more than $1 million. They had bathtubs of champagne brought out and gave 50 Cent a bunch of cash to throw. Um, so, what happened
Yeah.
is that E11 started accepting cryptocurrency payments in April of last year. So, that's April 2021. And between April and December of last year, they processed $6 million worth of transactions. In contrast to that, in the last 3 months, the club has just taken in $10,000. So um, this is what we call a boom and a bust, right? Insane, crazy behavior propping up. Well, conspicuous consumption seems to be one of the things that
Yes.
happens in booms quite a bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Flaunting, doing things that are just meant to show just how much money you have, right? Oh, that was one of the things that he said that was weird. He said crypto entrepreneurs would brag about their wealth by showing each other their digital wallets. You wouldn't normally show your bank account, but people do show their crypto wallets. That detail really,
Yeah.
really was interesting to me. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, and so now they're in the year since the crypto partiers aren't calling. So 2022 has been like a bust year for crypto, I guess. And
Yeah.
and then they kind of tied it into the FTX story. But basically, part of the point of this, as you pointed out, Black Horse, is that there was already problems before FTX collapsed. last month.
Yep. And so we should wrap this up by talking about some of the interesting behavior of the Alameda FTX guys that might be part of the story as to why they're not already behind bars.
Right. Okay. Well, I've seen, just because I shared the marketing Black Horse, I started to see people replying with their various theories. Um, One thing to note, and I'll be curious how much weight you put on this, is the difference between the political contributions of the two. So they both made political contributions. Bernie Madoff, it was about $230,000. Sam Bankman-Fried by himself was 40 million, and then other people in the company add another 30 for a total of 70 million flowing from FTX out to primarily Democrats in the case of Sam Bankman-Fried, but it mentioned that one of the other guys was contributing a lot of money to Republicans. So as usual with
Yeah,
these kinds of
SBF was
things,
the
they're greasing
was the
greasing palms everywhere, you know.
yeah SBF was the number two donor to the Biden campaign
After Soros.
behind after Soros. Yes, so you
No,
can
let
thank
me
him
be
for
careful here.
the
This was for the midterms that you're talking about, not Biden.
both
Oh,
the
really?
Biden campaign,
Oh,
and
okay. I
then he
missed that.
was the number two. Then he was a contributor for the midterms as well. Though we
Okay.
don't have clear information yet because the FEC filings for this quarter aren't out yet.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay. Um,
uh, so
so
there's
that's
that issue,
interesting.
and then there's his quote unquote charitable contributions.
Right.
So he has the FTX Foundation, which has pledged to contribute. They had something like $1 billion of pledges. It's unclear how much of that money has actually gone out already, but this is the whole effective altruism thing, where a lot of the charities that he's donated to, these aren't exactly soup kitchens. So he's donating to what I would editorialize as DNC money laundering machines.
Uh-huh.
So
Right.
you
Right.
don't you donate to solve climate change, and all the activists who work there are all DNC activists, and they get money into their nonprofit in order to have a job so that they can be activists all day.
Right. Got it. And did you look into this? There was supposedly a Ukraine angle.
Yeah, so the Ukrainian government invested a very, very large amount of money in FTT. It's unclear how much. Uh,
Oh.
we shouldn't speak too much about it because uh, the allegations here are not proven.
Okay. Yeah.
But
So we got to be
there's
cautious
a
on this one.
but there's a set of allegations that argue that basically SBF donates money to the DNC dumps money in the Ukrainian government then dumps money into FTT extracts it into the pockets, it extracts it and gives it into and puts it into the pockets of these various political figures, either through charities or directly.
Right.
And so exactly how true that is will depend on what comes out in terms of how much money was coming back from Ukraine into FTT. We know that it was some. We don't actually know, and we probably will never know how much.
Right. But it seems like even ignoring the Ukraine angle, we already know that he was uh, giving money to a lot of political players. And basically, I mean, let me be careful here. He's not irrational, right?
Yeah.
In this, these are powerful people, and he might avoid jail because he knew where to make sure the money flowed to. What
Well,
is
and
it
if he's
in the
if he's really
Godfather?
wise,
In the Godfather, the guy says, "I just want to wet my beak." Right? He let the
yeah.
right people wet their beaks. Is kind of what it looks like, right?
Well, and if he's really wise, he's done it to the Bahamian government as well, so that extradition will be a challenge if anybody
The
decides to charge him.
the what government?
He's in the Bahamas, the Bahamian government.
The Bahamian. Okay, yeah, yeah, got it. Right. So hopefully for him, he let them wet their beak too. So
So
the U.S. won't be inclined to push too hard to go after him, and the Bahama government won't be inclined to hand him over. Right.
that's the theory.
Right.
We'll see how it plays out for him.
So, having said that he did this New York Times event, he did it remotely from the Bahamas, and I'll be curious to see what happens. But so far, he actually hasn't taken the risk of setting foot in U.S. territory, right?
That's correct.
Because I'd
And
say there's a non-zero chance that they would grab him if they could.
well, certainly, if he sets foot in certain states, it would shock me if the state police didn't arrest him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's certainly committed federal crimes, but he's also probably committed state crimes in a number of different states.
Right.
So it would be very unwise, I think, to put himself down in any jurisdiction in which he didn't have political security.
Oh, let me slip in this super chat from Dreadnought. Thank you. When Markopoulos went to the SEC, their reaction was to ask Madoff to register as an investment advisor. um, and then he says, also, I think when you get to the $1 billion point, incompetence should be a crime. Well,
Yeah.
that's a whole rabbit hole. But okay, so where were we? Right. So is that why he's getting better treatment than Madoff in your view? Basically, that he spread the money to the right people.
I'm going to decline to editorialize. Let the reader draw their own conclusion.
Yeah, it is curious, right? Because in many ways, they do seem quite parallel, right?
Well, and it's worth noting, like, Madoff didn't just go to jail. He was sentenced to like 240 years or something.
150, yeah. And he died in
Yeah.
jail. He actually died in jail.
He died in jail.
Yeah.
His wife is still living in Florida, and anytime she spends more than $100, she has to submit the expense to a lawyer for review. Like, they didn't just go after him; they went after him hammer and tongs.
Right.
And we're gonna see. We're gonna see.
Yeah, his
But
secretary went to jail. I mean, I I know the regime is amazing at all lining up on one side of things and stuff, but I suspect there's somebody somewhere at the SEC or something that would love to take this guy down. You know?
yeah, you would have to imagine. There's a lot of palms to grease the entire U.S. regime. Like,
Exactly.
so
I mean, wouldn't you like to be the guy who took down, Bernie Madoff #2, right? So somebody
yeah.
somewhere probably in that bureaucracy probably would like to be that guy.
Well, and the other problem with the strategy of letting people wet their beaks is that after you're no longer in a position to let them do it, you're no longer useful, right? So if you were an official in the Bahamian government, yeah, sure, you gave me $30 million yesterday, but what are you going to do for me tomorrow?
Exactly. And he's not in a position to do anything for anybody at this point, as far as I can tell.
So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, and my sense,
the only question is, what leverage does he have? So what can he say about what people? And who knows?
Right. Yeah. Did he pull out? Did he arrange what I would call Jeffrey Epstein insurance?
Well,
by which I mean blackmail.
If this Ukrainian angle is accurate, then perhaps he has some leverage. Who knows?
Right. Foreign policy leverage of some sort, or because of unethical foreign policy dealings that he could reveal or something.
Who knows?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I would say that certainly he's vulnerable to the narrative going against him. That is, if he becomes too inconvenient for the regime, like there's a lot of outrage over this case, and the cages keep being rattled, they could decide this guy's too much of a liability. We got to throw him under the bus, right? I mean, I would say that he's living a day-to-day existence at this point.
Yeah, you might well be podcasting next week, and SBF is in like Gitmo or something, getting waterboarded. Like, who knows?
Right. Okay, yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think we drew most of the parallels and interesting points. I really thought it was quite interesting how in both cases a bust uh, ended up, as far as we can tell, being related to the exposure of the scam. Again, we're discussing this FTX story in a way really quite early. There's a lot that will probably be revealed over time, given the way the news cycle works. How many people would be paying attention to that point? I don't know. Some people will be, some mad people will be very interested in how this goes, right? Some people who
Well,
lost
and
money.
some people like this show pay attention to all sorts of interesting things for a very long time.
That's
So
true. I'm a big believer in remembering rather than forgetting, shall we say? Um,
yes.
so we'll try to keep our eye on this story. Okay, so I think that covers what we wanted to cover, and we probably got all our super chats, but let me make sure. Check subscribe star where you can always do a tip. Oh, here we go. Our reliable Sam153. Ah, he says Albertan here. I didn't know that, Sam. I hope the Sovereignty Act bears fruit. Trudeau deserves it. Black Horse. He's not done. Black Horse. Is there a chance British Columbia would come for the ride? Now, let me understand. Is BC kind of in that similar western,
it it's on
rural
the
kind
west
of a?
coast.
Yeah, so it's got the
So
coastal
BC,
thing.
yeah, and it's got a huge Asian elite that
Uh,
are very influential there.
mm-hmm,
Um, it's kind of its own place. I'm not personally that familiar with the politics. Typically, the politics run a bit north south there rather than east west.
mm-hmm,
So BC is quite a different place
right.
than Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. So you know, I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
we'll have to see. Um, I would say that BC doesn't have a great deal in common in terms of interests with the rest of Canada, and its elite don't really cohere very well with the rest of Canada's elite. Um, so the issues that tip that off tend to be like different kinds of issues. So like federal legislation related to foreign property investment would be a much bigger breaking point for BC than the kind of crap that the Trudeau government is doing now. It seems like this is another scandal in Canadian politics, kind of low grade scandal, but it seems like like a dozen or more candidates for the Liberal government were financed by the CCP.
Oh.
So I I think given that dynamic and given how influential offshore money is in BC politics, I don't anticipate. I would say that BC would be much more aligned at a governance level with the Laurentian elite than with the Albertan
Mm-hmm.
elite.
Got it. Editorial comment from Lumberg about BC Asians and stoner mountain bikers. He says.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and then Lady of Shalott on the Ukraine issue says all the cash sloshing around the Ukraine. The Duran reported on the numbers of Ukrainians setting up in Monaco now, and
Oh
that
my goodness.
she thinks that should still be on YouTube. So, yep, war is hell for most of us, but there's always a few who make out like bandits during a war. That's just the sad reality, I'm afraid to say. Okay, I think we caught up on all the comments. Great interaction from the chat and input from the chat. Thank you, everybody. We will follow this story. I actually like it, Black Horse, that we build up a portfolio of through lines, right? Which we can sort of check in on as something develops.
Yeah, well, we should probably come back and talk about European energy and inflation at some point. So I think we'll probably get back to that in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, okay. You think there's news there to comment on since
Well,
the last time?
we now have to evaluate the claims of a winter of death in Europe
Right.
because it's now winter.
We're
So
getting into it. Yeah, you're right. You're right. It should be pretty much the hard
no different than we
winter.
have to evaluate Mr. Biden's claim of a winter of death for the unvaccinated. I think we have to evaluate the claims of a winter of darkness and despair for Europe. So
Right. Yeah, I'd say let's try to give that another month or so, like maybe early January, just to really
yeah,
be
yeah.
into winter, and then we'll give an assessment of that. Okay, excellent. All right, thanks everybody, and we will see you next week with I believe I've got some reading to do. I believe we're going to cover Days of Rage, which is about the hundreds of bombings in the United States during the 1970s by left-wing radicals. So we'd be covering that as our ongoing part of the left wing terror series. And that'll do it. Thanks, everyone.